I'm going to do my best to finish it. To finish the Whacky Read-a-Thon. We've gotten past the climax. Now we have to see what this book is all about. Gradually, as he became more adept at controlling the fighter's speed, direction of movement, orientation, weapons, the game became more complex. By the time he had been at command school for a year, he was adept at running the simulator at any of 15 levels, from controlling an individual fighter to commanding a fleet. He had long since realized that as the battle room was to the battle school, the simulator was to the command school. These classes were valuable, but the real education was the game. People dropped in from time to watch him play. They never spoke, hardly anyone did, unless they had something specific to teach him. The watchers would say, silently watching him, run through a difficult simulation, and then leave just as he finished. What are you doing? He wanted to ask. Judging me? Determining whether you want to trust the fleet to me? Just because I didn't ask for it. He found a great deal of what he had learned at the battle school transferred to the simulator. He would routinely reorient the simulator every few minutes, rotating it so that it didn't get trapped to an up-down orientation, constantly reviewing his position from the enemy point of view. It was exhilarating at last to have such control over the battle, to be able to see every point of it. It was also frustrating to have so little control too, for the computer-controlled fighters were only as good as the computer allowed. They took no initiative. They had no intelligence. He began to wish for his toon leaders, so that he could count on some of the squadrons doing well without having constant supervision. At the end of the first year, he was winning every battle on the simulator, and played the game as if the machine were a natural part of his body. One day, eating a meal with Graf, he asked, "Is that all the simulator does?" "Is what all?" "The way it plays now. It's easy. It hasn't gotten any harder for a while." "Oh?" Graf seemed unconcerned, but then Graf was always seemingly unconcerned. The next day, everything changed. Graf went away, and in his place, they gave Ender a companion. Once again, Mr. Scott Card. I need to look and see when this game, when this book came out, because now I'm almost guessing the 80s. It's I have said several times before that I didn't think that he knew what video games would be like, so that's why the first game was just like a giant acid trip. But no, he visualized what games are. I mean, yeah, the AI can be like boring to play against sometimes, and that's why people play against other people. So that's another great thing that he's learned, or that he predicted. But also, they're using the game not so much to test him, but to train him in a way, right? Or yeah, to see what he's really learned. So I guess a test. But like playing a game over and over again, it can change you. It can absolutely change who you are, I think. For a year, it absolutely changed the way Ender is. He was in the room when Ender awoke in the morning. He was an old man, sitting cross legged on the floor. Ender looked at him expectantly, waiting for the man to speak. He said nothing. Ender got up and showered and dressed, content to let the man keep his silence if he wanted. He had long learned silence when something unusual was going on, something that was part of someone else's plan and not his own. He would find out more information by waiting than by asking. Adults almost always lost their patience before Ender did. The man still hadn't spoken when Ender was ready and went to the door to leave the room. The door didn't open. Ender turned to face the man sitting on the floor. He looked to be about 60, by far older, by far the oldest man Ender had seen on Eros. He had a day's growth of white whiskers that grizzled his face only slightly less than his close-cut hair. His face sagged a little, and his eyes were surrounded by creases and lines. He looked at Ender with an expression that bespoke only apathy. Ender turned to the door and tried to open it. "All right," he said, giving up. "Why is the door locked?" The old man continued to look at him blankly. "So, this is a game," thought Ender. "Well, if they want me to go to class, they'll unlock the door. If they don't, they won't. I don't care." Ender didn't like the games where rules could be anything and the objective was known to them alone. So he wouldn't play. He also refused to get angry. He went through a relaxing exercise as he leaned on the door, and soon he was calm again. The old man continued to watch him impassively. Test? Don't knock into. Oh no. Ender didn't like games where the rules could be anything and the objective was unknown to them alone. So he wouldn't play. He also refused to get angry. He went through a relaxing exercise as he leaned on the door, and soon he was calm again. The old man continued to watch him impassively. Ender it seemed to go on for hours, Ender refusing to speak, the old man seeming to be a mindless mute. Sometimes Ender wondered if he were mentally ill, escaped from some medical ward somewhere in Eros, living out some insane fantasy here in Ender's room. But the longer it went on, with no one coming to the door, no one looking for him, the more certain he became that this was something deliberate, meant to disconcert him. Ender did not want to give the old man the victory. To pass the time, he began to do exercises. Some were impossible without the gym equipment, but the others, especially from his personal defense class, he could do without any aids. The exercises moved him around the room. He was practicing lunges and kicks. One move took him near the old man, as had come near him before, but this time the claw shot out and seized Ender's left leg in the middle of a kick. It pulled Ender off his feet and landed him heavily on the floor. Ender leapt to his feet immediately, furious. He found the old man sitting calmly, cross-legged, not breathing heavily, as if he had never moved. Ender stood poised to fight, but the other's immobility made it impossible for Ender to attack. What? Kick the old man's head off? And then explain that to Graf? Oh, the old man kicked me, and I had to get even? He went back to his exercises. The old man kept watching. Finally, tired and angry at this wasted day, a prisoner in his room, Ender went back to his bed to get his desk. As he leaned over to pick up the desk, he felt a hand jab roughly between his thighs, another grab his hair. In a moment, he had been turned upside down. His face and shoulders were being pressed to the floor by the old man's knee, while his back was excruciatingly bent, and his legs were pinioned on the old man's arm. Ender was helpless to use his arms. He couldn't bend his back to gain slack, so he could use his legs. In less than 2 seconds, the old man had completely defeated Ender Wiggin. All right, Ender gasped. You win. The man's knee thrust painfully downward. Since when? Asked the man. Do you have to tell the enemy he has won? Ender remained silent. I surprised you once, Ender Wiggin. Why didn't you destroy me immediately afterward? Just because I look peaceful? You turned your back on me. Stupid. You have learned nothing. You never have had a teacher. Ender was angry now, and made no attempt to control or conceal it. I've had too many teachers. How was I supposed to know you turn out to be an enemy? Ender Wiggin, replied the old man. I am your enemy. The first one you've ever had who was smarter than you. There was no teacher but the enemy. No one but the enemy will tell you what the enemy is going to do. No one but the enemy will teach you how to destroy and conquer. Only the enemy shows you where you are weak. Only the enemy tells you where he is strong. And the rules of the game are what you can do to him and what you can do to stop him from doing to you. I am your enemy from now on. From now on, I am your teacher. The old man let Ender's legs fall. Because he still held Ender's head to the floor, the boy couldn't use his arms to compensate, and his legs hit the surface with a loud crack and a sickening pain. The old man stood and let Ender rise. Slowly, Ender pulled his legs under him, and with a faint groan of pain, he knelt on all fours for a moment, recovering. Then his right arm flashed out, reaching for his enemy. The old man quickly danced back, and Ender's hand closed on the air as his teacher's foot shot forward to catch Ender on the chin. Ender's chin wasn't there. He was lying flat on his back, spitting on the floor, and during the momentum that his teacher was off balance from his kick, Ender's feet smashed into the old man's other leg. He fell in a heap, They're close enough to strike out and hit Ender in the face. Ender couldn't find an arm or a leg that held still long enough to be grabbed, and in the meantime, blows were landing on his back and arms. Ender was smaller. He couldn't reach past the old man's flailing limbs. Finally, he managed to pull away and scrambled back near the door. The old man was sitting cross-legged again, but now the apathy was gone. He was smiling. Better this time, boy, but slow. You will have to be better than a fleet with a fleet than you are with your body, or no one will be safe with you in command. Lesson learned? Ender nodded slowly. He ached in 100 places. Good, said the old man. Then we'll never have to have such a battle again. All the rest with the simulator. I will program your battles now, not the computer. I will devise the strategy of your enemy, and you will learn to be quick and discover what tricks the enemy has for you. Remember, boy, from now on, the enemy is more clever than you. From now on, the enemy is stronger than you. From now on, you are always about to lose. The old man's face grew serious again. You will be about to lose, Ender, but you will win, and you will learn to defeat the enemy. He will teach you now. The teacher got up. In this school, it has always been the practice for a young student to be chosen by an older student. The two become companions, and the older boy teaches the younger one everything he knows. Always they fight. Always they compete. Always they are together. I have chosen you. Ender spoke as the old man walked to the door. You're too old to be a student. One is never too old to be a student of the enemy. I have learned from the buggers. You will learn from me. As the old man palmed the door open, Ender leaped into the air and kicked him in the small of his back with both feet. He hit hard enough that he rebounded onto his feet, as the old man cried out in pain and collapsed on the floor. The old man got up slowly, holding onto the door handle, his face contorted with pain. He seemed disabled, but Ender didn't trust him. Yet in spite of his suspicion, he was caught off guard by the old man's speed. In a moment, he found himself on the floor near the opposite wall, his nose and lip bleeding where his face had hit the bed. He was able to turn to see the old man standing in the doorway, wincing and holding his back. The old man grinned. Ender grinned back. Teacher, he said, do you have a name? Mazer Rackham, said the old man, and then he was gone. From then on, Ender was either with Mazer Rackham or alone. The old man rarely spoke. But here he was at meals, at tutorials, at the simulator, in his room at night. Sometimes Mazer would leave, but always, when Mazer wasn't there, the door was locked, and no one came until Mazer returned. Ender went through a week in which he called him Jailer Rackham. Mazer answered the name as readily as to his own, and showed no sign that it bothered him at all. Ender soon gave it up. There were compensations. Mazer took Ender through the videos of old battles from the first invasion and the disastrous defeats of the IF and the second invasion. These were not pieced together from the censored public videos, but whole and continuous. Since many videos were working in the major battles, they studied bugger tactics and strategies from many angles. For the first time in his life, a teacher was pointing out things that Ender had not already seen for himself. For the first time, Ender found a living mind he could admire. Why aren't you dead? Ender asked him. You fought your battle 70 years ago. I don't even think you're 60 years old. The miracle of relativity, said Mazer. They kept me here for 20 years after the battle, even though I begged them to let me command one of the starships that launched against the bugger home planet and the bugger colonies. Then they came to understand some things about the way soldiers behave in the stress of battle. What things? You've never been taught enough psychology to understand. Enough to say that they realized that even though I would never be able to command the fleet, I'd be dead before the fleet even arrived. I was still the only person to be able to understand the things I understood about the buggers. I was, they realized, the only person who had ever defeated the buggers by intelligence rather than luck. They needed me here to teach the person who would command the fleet. So they sent you out in a starship and got you up to a relativistic speed? And then I turned around and came home. A very dull voyage, Ender. 50 years in space. Officially, only 8 years passed for me, but it felt like 500. Also I could teach the next commander everything I knew. I'm to be the commander then. Let's say you're our best at present. There are others being prepared too? No. What makes me the only choice then? Mazur shrugged. Except you. You're still alive, aren't you? Why not you? Mazur shook his head. Why not? You won before. I cannot be the commander for good and sufficient reasons. Show me how you beat the buggers, Mazur. Mazur's face went inscrutable. You've shown me every other battle 7 times at least. I think I've seen ways to beat the buggers, like you did before, but you've never shown me how you actually did beat them. The video is a very tightly kept secret, Ender. I know. I pieced it together partly. You, with your tiny reserve force, and their armada, those great big heavy-bellied ships, launching their swarms of fighters. You dart in at one ship, fire at it, an explosion, and that's where they always stop the clips. After that, it's just soldiers going into bugger ships, already finding the dead inside. Mazur grinned. So much for tightly kept secrets. Come on, let's watch the video. They were alone in the video room, and Ender palmed the door locked. All right, let's watch. The video showed exactly what Ender has pieced together. Mazur's suicidal plunge into the heart of the enemy formation, the single explosion, and then nothing. Mazur's ship went on, dodged the shockwave, and wove its way among the other bugger ships. They did not fire on him. They did not change course. 2 of them crashed into each other and exploded, a needless collision that either pilot could have avoided. Neither made the slightest movement. Mazur sped up the action, skipped ahead. We waited for 3 hours, he said. Nobody could believe it. Then the IF ships began approaching the bugger starships. Marines began cutting and boarding operations. The videos showed the buggers already dead at their posts. So you see, said Mazur, you already knew all there was to see. Why did it happen? Nobody knows. I have my personal opinions, but there are plenty of scientists who tell me I'm less than qualified to have opinions. You're the one who won the battle. I thought that qualified me to comment too, but you know how it is. Xenobiologists and xenophysiologists can't accept the idea that a star pilot scooped them by sheer guesswork. I think they all hate me because after they saw these videos, they had to live out the rest of their natural lives here on Eros. Security, you know. They weren't happy. Tell me. The buggers don't talk. They think to each other, and it's instantaneous, like the philotic effect, the Ansible. But most people always thought that meant a controlled communication, like language. I think you a thought, and then you answer me. I never believed that. It's too immediate, the way they respond together to things. You've seen the videos. They aren't conversing and deciding among possible courses of action. Every ship acts like part of a single organism. It responds the way your body responds. During combat, different parts automatically, thoughtlessly, doing everything they're supposed to do. They aren't having a mental conversation between people with different thought processes. All their thoughts are present, together, at once. A single person? And each bugger is like a hand or a foot? Yes. I wasn't the first person to suggest it, but I was the first to believe it. And something else. Something so childish and stupid the xenobiologist laughed at me. The buggers are bugs. They're like ants and bees, a queen, the workers. That was maybe 100 million years ago. But that's how they started, that kind of pattern. It's a sure thing none of the buggers we saw were in any way of making little more buggers. So, when they evolved this ability to think together, wouldn't they still keep the queen? Wouldn't the queen be the center of the group? Why would that ever change? So it's the queen who controls the whole group. I had evidence too. No evidence that any of them could see. It wasn't there in the first invasion because that was exploratory. But the second invasion was a colony to set up a new hive or whatever. And so they brought a queen. The videos of the second invasion, when they were destroying our fleets out in the comment shell, he began to call up and display the buggers' patterns. Show me the queen's ship. It was subtle. Ender couldn't see it for a long time. The bugger ships kept moving, all of them. There was no obvious flagship, no apparent nerve center. But gradually, as Mazur played the videos over and over again, Ender began to see the way all the movements focused on radiated from a center point. The center point shifted, but it was obvious after he looked long enough that the eyes of the fleet, the eye of the fleet, the perspective from which all decisions were being made, was one particular ship. He pointed it out. You see it, I see it. That makes two people out of all those who have seen this video. But it's true, isn't it? They make that ship move just like any other ship. They know it's their weak point. But you're right. That's the queen. But then you think that when you went for it, but they would have immediately focused all the power on you. They could have blown you out of the sky. I know. That part I don't understand. Not that they didn't try to stop me. They were firing at me. But it's as if they really couldn't believe until it was too late that I would actually kill their queen. Maybe on their world, queens are never killed or captured. I did something they didn't think an enemy would ever do. And when she died, all the others died. No, they just went stupid. The first ships we boarded, the buggers were still alive organically, but they didn't move, didn't respond to anything. Even when our scientists vivisected some of them to see if we could learn a few more things about them. After a while, they all died. No will. There's nothing in those little bodies when the queen is gone. Why don't they believe you? Because we didn't find a queen. She got blown to pieces. Fortunes of war. Biology takes second place to survival. But some of them are coming around to my way of thinking. You can't live in this place without the evidence staring at you in the face. What evidence is there on Eros? Ender, look around you. Human beings didn't carve this place. We like taller ceilings, for one thing. This was the buggers' advance post in the first invasion. They carved this place out before we even knew they were here. We're living in a bugger hive. But we already paid our rent. It cost the Marines 1,000 lives to clear them out of these honeycombs, room by room. The buggers fought for every meter of it. Now understood why the rooms always felt wrong to him. I knew this place wasn't a human place. This was the treasure trove. If they had known we would win the first war, they probably would have never built this place. We learned gravity manipulation because they enhanced gravity here. We learned efficient use of stellar energy because they blacked out this planet. In fact, that's how we discovered them. In a period of 3 days, arrows gradually disappeared from telescopes. We sent a tug out to find why. It found out. The tug transmitted its videos, including the buggers boarding and slaughtering the crew. It kept right on transmitting through the entire bugger examination of the boat. Not until they finally dismantled the entire tug did the transmission stop. It was their blindness. They never had to transmit anything by machine. So with the crew dead, it didn't occur to them that anybody could be watching. Why did they kill the crew? Why not? To them, losing a few crew members would be like clipping your nails. Nothing to get upset about. They probably thought they were routinely shutting down our communications by turning off the workers running the tug, not murdering living, sentient beings with an independent genetic future. Murder is no big deal to them. Only queen killing really is murder, because only queen killing closes off a genetic path. So they didn't know what they were doing. Don't start apologizing for them, Ender. Just because they didn't know they were killing human beings doesn't mean they weren't killing human beings. We do have a right to defend ourselves as best we can, and the only way we found that works is killing the buggers before they kill us. Think of it this way. In all the bugger wars so far, they've killed thousands and thousands of living, thinking beings. And in all those wars, we've only killed one. If you hadn't killed the Queen, Mazur, would we have lost the war? I'd say the odds would have been 3-2 against us. I still think I would have trashed their fleet pretty bad before they burned us out. They have their great response time and a lot of firepower. But we have a few advantages too. Every single one of our ships contains an intelligent human being who's thinking on his own. Every one of us is capable of coming up with a brilliant solution to a problem. They can only come up with one brilliant solution at a time. The buggers think fast, but they aren't smart all over. But on our side, when some incredibly timid and stupid commanders lost the major battles of the second invasion, some of their subordinates were able to do real damage to the bugger fleet. What about when our invasion reaches them? Will we just get the Queen again? The buggers didn't learn interstellar travel by being dumb. That was a strategy that could only work once. I suspect we'll never get near a Queen unless we actually make it to their home planet. After all, the Queen doesn't have to be with them to direct a battle. The Queen only has to be present, to have little baby buggers. The second invasion was a colony. The Queen was coming to populate the Earth. But this time, no, that won't work. We'll have to beat them fleet by fleet. And because they have the resources of dozens of star systems to draw on, my guess is they'll outnumber us by a lot in every battle. Ender remembered his battle against two armies at once and thought they were cheating. When the real war begins, it'll be like that every time, and there won't be any gate I can go for. We've only got two things going for us, Ender. We don't have aim. We don't have to aim particularly well. Our weapons have great spread. Then we aren't using the nuclear missiles from the first and second invasion? Dr. Device is much more powerful. Nuclear weapons, after all, were weak enough to be used on Earth at one time. The little doctor could never be used on a planet. Still, I wish we had one during the second invasion. How does it work? I don't know, not well enough to build one. All the focal point of two beams. It sets up a field in which the molecules can't hold together anymore, Electrons can't be shared. How much physics do you know? At what level? We spend most of our time on astrophysics, but I know enough to get the idea. The field spreads out in a wide sphere, but it gets weaker the further it spreads, except that where it actually runs into a lot of molecules, it gets stronger and starts over. The bigger the ship, the stronger the new force field. So each time the field hits a ship, it sends out a new sphere. And if their ships are too close together, it can set up a chain that wipes them all out. Then the field dies down, and the molecules come back together. And where you had a ship, you now have a lump of dirt with a lot of iron molecules in it. No radioactivity, no mess, just dirt. We may be able to trap them together in the first battle. But they learn fast, and they'll keep their distance from each other. So Dr. Device isn't a missile. I can't shoot around corners. That's right. Missiles won't do any good now. We learned a lot from them in the first invasion, and they also learned from us. How to set up the ecstatic field, for instance. The little doctor penetrates the shield? As if it weren't there. You can't see through the shield to aim, to focus the beams, but since the generator of the ecstatic field is always in the exact center, it isn't hard to figure out. Why haven't I ever been trained with this? You always have. We just let the computer tend to it for you. Your job is to get into a superior strategic position and choose a target. The shipboard computers are much better at aiming the Dr. Device than you are. Why is it called Dr. Device? When it was developed, it was called a molecular detachment device. MD device. Ender still didn't understand. MD. The initials stand for medical doctor, too. MD. MD device. Therefore, Dr. Device. It was a joke. Ender didn't see what was funny about it. I'm realizing now that the battle in the war room was there mainly just as foreshadowing for the final battle. Because he does that same thing. He basically moves up this huge fleet and then he sucker punches him. They had changed the simulator. He could still control the perspective and degree of detail, but there were no ship's controls anymore. Instead, it was a new panel of levers and a small headset with earphones and a small microphone. The technician who was waiting there quickly explained how to wear the headset. How do I control the ships? Asked Ender. Nazar explained. He wasn't going to control ships anymore. You've reached the next phase of your training. You have experience in every level of strategy, but now it's time for you to concentrate on commanding an entire fleet. If you worked with toon leaders in battle school, so now you will work with squadron leaders. You have been assigned 3 dozen such leaders to train. You must teach them intelligent tactics. You must learn their strengths and limitations. You must make them into a whole. When will they come here? They're already in place in their own simulators. You will speak to them through the headset. The new levers on your panel enable you to see from the perspective of any of your squadron leaders. This more closely duplicates the conditions you might encounter in real battle, where you will know only what your ships can see. How can I work with squadron leaders I never see? And why would you need to see them? To know who they are, how they think. You'll learn who they are and how they think from the way they work in the simulator. But even so, I think you won't be concerned. They're listening to you right now. Put on the headset so you can hear them. Ender put on his headset. Salam, said a whisper in his ears. A lie, said Ender. And me, the dwarf. Bean. And Petra and Dink, Crazy Tom, Shin, Hot Soup, Fly, Molo, Karn, Carby, and the rest of the students Ender had fought with or against, everyone that Ender had trusted in the battle school. I didn't know you were here, he said. I didn't know you were coming. They've been flogging us through the simulation for 3 months now, said Dink. You'll find that I'm by far the best tactician, said Petra. Dink tries, but he has the mind of a child. So they began working together, each squadron leader commanding individual pilots, and Ender commanding the squadron leaders. They learned many ways of working together, as the simulator forced them to try different situations. Sometimes the simulator gave them a larger fleet to work with. Ender set them up in 3 or 4 toons that consisted of 3 or 4 squadrons each. Sometimes the simulator gave them a single starship with its 12 fighters, and he chose 3 squadron leaders with 4 fighters each. It was pleasure, it was play. The computer-controlled enemy was none too bright, and they always won despite their mistakes, their miscommunications. But in the 3 weeks they practiced together, Ender came to know them very well. Dink, who deftly carried out instructions, but was slow to improvise. Bean, who couldn't control large groups of ships effectively, but could use a few like a scalpel, reacting beautifully to anything the computer threw at him. A Lie, who was almost as good as a strategist as Ender, and could be entrusted to do well with half the fleet and only vague instructions. The better Ender knew them, the faster he could deploy them, the better he could use them. The simulator would display the situation on the screen. And that moment, Ender learned for the first time that his own fleet would consist of and how many the enemy fleet has deployed. It took him only a few minutes now to call the squadron leaders and get what he needed, assign them certain ships or groups of ships, and give them their assignments. Then, as the battle progressed, he would skip from one leader's point of view to another's, making suggestions and occasionally giving orders as the need arose. Since the others could see only their own battle perspective, he would sometimes give them orders that made no sense to them, but they too learned to trust Ender. If he told them to withdraw, they withdrew, knowing that either they were in an exposed position or their withdrawal might entice the enemy into a weakened posture. They also knew that Ender entrusted them to do as they judged best when he gave them no orders. If their style of fighting were not right for the situation they were placed in, Ender would not have chosen them for that assignment. The trust was complete, the working of the fleet quick and responsive. And at the end of 3 weeks, Mazur showed him a replay of their most recent battle, only this time from the enemy's point of view. This is what he saw as you attacked. What does it remind you of? The quickness of response, for instance. We look like a bugger fleet. You matched them, Ender. You're as fast as they are. And here, look at this. Ender watched as all his squadrons moved at once, each responding to its own situation, and guided by Ender's overall command, but daring, improvising, feinting, attacking with an independence no bugger fleet had ever seen before. The bugger hive mind is very good, but it can only concentrate at a few things at once. All your squadrons can concentrate a keen intelligence on what they're doing, and what they've been assigned to do is also guided by a clever mind. So you see that you do have some advantages: superior, though not irresistible, weaponry, comparable speed, and greater available intelligence. These are your advantages. Your disadvantage is that you will always be outnumbered. And after each battle, your enemy will learn more about you, how to fight, and those changes will be put into effect immediately. Ender waited for his conclusion. So, Ender, we will now begin your education. We have programmed the computer to simulate the kinds of situations we might expect in encounters with the enemy. We are using the movement patterns we saw in the second invasion, but instead of mindlessly following the same patterns, I will be controlling the the enemy simulation. At first, you will see easy situations that you are expected to win handedly. Learn from them, because I will always be there, one step ahead of you, programming more difficult and advanced patterns in the computer, so that your next battle is more difficult, so that you are pushed to the limit of your abilities and beyond. Time is short. We must learn as quickly as you can. When I gave myself to starship travel, just so I would be alive with you when you appeared, my wife and children all died, and my grandchildren were my own age when I came back. I had nothing to say to them. I was cut off from all the people I loved, everything I knew, living in this alien catacomb, forced to do nothing of importance, but teach student after student, each one so hopeful, each one ultimately a weakling, a failure. I teach, but no one learns. You too have great promise, like so many students before you, but the seeds of failure may be in you too. It's my job to find them, to destroy you if I can. And believe me, Ender, if you can be destroyed, I can do it. So I'm not the first? No, of course you're not. But you're the last. If you don't learn, there will be no time to find anyone else. So I have hope for you, if only because you are the only one left to hope for. What about the others, my squadron leaders? Which of them is fit to take your place? A lie. Be honest. Ender had no answer then. I am not a happy man, Ender. Humanity does not ask us to be happy. It merely asks us to be brilliant on its behalf. Survival first, and then happiness, as we can manage it. So, Ender, I hope you do not bore me during your training with complaints that you are not having fun. Take what pleasure you can in the interests of your work, but your work is first. Learning is first. Winning is everything, because without it, there is nothing. When you can give me back my dead wife, Ender, then you can complain to me about what this education costs you. I wasn't trying to get out of anything, but you will, Ender, because I am going to grind you down to dust if I can. I am going to hit you with everything I can imagine, and I will have no mercy, because when you face the buggers, they will think of things I can't imagine, and compassion for human beings is impossible for them. You can't grind me down, Mazur. Oh, can't I? Because I'm stronger than you. Mazur smiled. We'll see about that, Ender. Mazuraka, Mazuraka. Goodbye, Colonel Graff. Here comes Mazuraka. So Ender's been at the battle school for a while, and he graduated from the battle school, and now he's like at the academy. And the crazy thing about this book is I think it was written in like the 70s or the 80s or something, but Orson Scott Card basically knows what video games are like nowadays. He knows that the AI can only do so much. There's only so much you can do with it before you get bored. He knows that like playing video games will like hypnotically change your brain and mind. Um, he knows about like using like changing the angle of the camera and zooming in and out on like specific points of interest in the game. Um, and I mean, yeah, this is all written like 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, like an insane amount of time ago. And it's just like um Orson Scott Card. He's a pretty smart guy. I'll have to see. I've read quite a few books in this series in particular. None of them are particularly awesome, but I really like this one because it goes over military strategy remarkably well. And really the whole like it's basically like the Full Metal Jacket of books, I would say. I'm sure there's a Full Metal Jacket book, but for me this is like the quintessential like training experience. Because when I was doing it, it felt a lot like the stuff that Ender went through. It is a bit of a challenge, I notice, smoking bong pot while reading because I get slowly less smart. I get unsmarter as it goes on. But I like reading aloud because it is a challenge. It is absolutely a challenge, and sometimes I slip up. But everyone slips up all the time, so you want to manage your slip ups. You want to figure out what you're going to do about your slip ups. Typically, the best thing to do is just get past them and just like not look back. Mazur wakened him before morning. The clock said 0340, and Ender felt groggy as he padded along the corridor behind Mazur. Early to bed, early to rise, Mazur intoned. Makes a mad stupid and blind in the eyes. He had been dreaming that buggers were vivisecting him. Only instead of cutting his body open, they were cutting up his memories and displaying them like holograms and trying to make sense of them. It was a very odd dream, and Ender couldn't easily shake loose of it, even as he walked through the tunnels of the simulator room. The buggers tormented him in his sleep, and Mazur couldn't leave him alone when he was awake. Between the two of them, he had no rest. Ender forced himself awake. Apparently, Mazur meant it when he said he had meant to break Ender down, and forcing him to play when tired and sleepy was just the sort of cheap and easy trick Ender should have expected. Well, today it wouldn't work. He got to the simulator and found his squadron leaders already on the wire, waiting for him. There was no enemy yet, so he divided them into two armies and began a mock battle, commanding both sides so he could control the test that each of his leaders was going through. They began slowly, but soon were vigorous and alert. Then the simulator went blank. The ships disappeared, and everything changed at once. The near edge of the simulator field, they could see the shapes, drawn in holographic light, of three starships. From the human fleet, each would have 12 fighters. The enemy, obviously aware of the human presence, had formed a globe with a single ship at the center. Ender was not fooled. It would not be a queen ship. The buggers outnumbered Ender's force by 2 to 1, and they were also grouped much closer together than they should have been. Dr. Device would be able to do much more damage than the enemy expected. Ender selected one starship, made it blink in the simulator field, and spoke on the microphone. A lie. This is yours. Assign Petra and Vlad to the fighters as you wish. He assigned the other two starships with their fighter forces, except for one fighter from each starship that he reserved for Beam. Slip the wall and get below them, Bean. Unless they start chasing you, then run back to the reserves for safety. Otherwise, get in a place where I can call on you for quick results. Ally, form your force into a compact assault at one point in their globe. Don't fire until I tell you. This is maneuver only. This one's easy, Ender, Ally said. It's easy, so why not be careful? I'd like to do this without the loss of a single ship. Ender grouped his reserves in two forces that shadowed Ally at a distance. Bean was already off the simulator, though Ender occasionally flipped to Bean's point of view to keep track of where he was. It was Ally, however, who played the delicate game with the enemy. He was in a bullet-shaped formation and probed the enemy globe. Wherever he came near, the bugger ships pulled back, as if to draw him in toward the ship in the center. Ally skimmed to the side. The bugger ships kept up with him, withdrawing whenever he was close, returning to the sphere pattern when he passed. Feint, withdraw. Skim the globe to another point. Withdraw again, feint again. And then Ender said, Go on in, Ally. His bullet started in, while he said to Ender, You know they'll just let me through and surround me and eat me alive. Just ignore that ship in the middle. Whatever you say, boss. Sure enough, the globe began to contract. Ender brought the reserves forward. The enemy ships concentrated on the side of the globe near the reserves. Attack them there, where they're most concentrated, Ender said. This defies 4,000 years of military history, said Ally, moving his fighters forward. We're supposed to attack where we outnumber them. In this simulation, they obviously don't know what our weapons can do. It'll only work once, so let's make it spectacular. Fire at will. Ally did. The simulation responded beautifully. First one or two, then a dozen. Then most of the enemy ships exploded in dazzling light, as the field leapt from ship to ship in a tight formation. Stay out of the way, Ender said. The ships on the far side of the globe formation were not affected by the chain reaction. But it was a simple matter to hunt them down and destroy them. Bean took care of stragglers and tried to escape towards his end of the space. The battle was over. It had been easier than most of their recent exercises. Mazur shrugged when Ender told him so. This is a simulation of a real invasion. There had to be one battle in which they didn't know what we could do. Now your work begins. Try not to be too arrogant about the victory. I'll give you the real challenges soon enough. Ender practiced 10 hours a day with his squadron leaders, but not all at once. He gave them a few hours in the afternoon to rest. Simulated battles under Mazur's supervision came every 2 or 3 days, and as Mazur had promised, they were never so easy again. The enemy quickly abandoned its attempt to surround Ender, and never again grouped its forces closely enough to allow a chain reaction. There was something new every battle. Everything became harder. Sometimes, Ender had only a single starship and 8 fighters. Once, the enemy dodged through an asteroid belt. Sometimes, the enemy left stationary traps, large installations that blew up if Ender brought one of his squadrons too close, often crippling or destroying some of Ender's ships. You cannot absorb losses! Mazur shouted at him after one battle. When you get into a real battle, you won't have a luxury of an infinite supply of computer-generated fighters. You'll have what you brought with you and nothing more. Now get used to fighting without unnecessary waste. It wasn't unnecessary waste, Ender said. I can't win battles if I'm so terrified of losing a ship I never take any risks. Mazur smiled. Excellent, Ender. You're beginning to learn. But in a real battle, you would have superior officers and, worst of all, civilians shouting those things at you. Now, if the enemy had been at all bright, they would have caught you here and taken Tom's squadron. Together, they went over the battle. And the next practice, Ender would show his leaders what Mazur had showed him, and they'd learn to cope with it the next time they saw it. They thought they'd been ready before, that they'd worked smoothly together as a team. Now, though, having fought through real challenges together, they all began to trust each other more than ever, and battles became exhilarating. They told Ender that the ones who weren't actually playing would come into the simulator rooms and watch. Ender imagined what it would be like to have his friends there with him, cheering or laughing, or gasping with apprehension. Sometimes he thought it would be a great distraction, but other times he wished for it with all his heart. Even when he had spent his days lying out in the sunlight on a raft in a lake, he had not been so lonely. Mazarakam was his companion, was his teacher, but was not his friend. He made no complaint, though. Mazar told him there would be no pity, and his private unhappiness meant nothing to anyone. Most of the time, it meant nothing even to Ender. He kept his mind on the game, trying to learn from the battles, and not just the particular lessons of that battle, but what the buggers might have done if they had been more clever, and how Ender might react with what they'll do in the future. He lived with past battles and future battles both, waking and sleeping, and he drove his squadron leaders with an intensity that occasionally provoked rebelliousness. "You are too kind to us," said Eli one day. "Why don't you get annoyed with us for not being brilliant every moment of every practice? If you keep coddling us like this, we'll think you're like us." Some of the others laughed in their microphones. Ender recognized the irony, of course, and answered with a long silence. When he finally spoke, he ignored Eli's complaint. "Again," he said, and this time without self-pity. "They did it again, and they did it right." But their trust in Ender as a commander grew. Their friendship, remembered from the battle school days, gradually disappeared. It was to each other that they became close. It was with each other that they exchanged confidences. Ender was their teacher and commander, as distant from them as Mazur was from him, and also as demanding. They fought all the better for it, and Ender was not distracted from his work. At least, not while he was awake. As he drifted off to sleep each night, it was with thoughts of the simulator playing to his mind. But in the night, he thought of other things. Often he remembered the corpse of the giant, decaying steadily. He did not remember it, though, in the pixels of the picture on his desk. Instead, it was real, the faint odor of death still lingering near it. Things were changed in his dreams. The little village that had grown up between the giant's ribs was now composed of buggers now, and they saluted him gravely, like gladiators, greeting Caesar before they died for his entertainment. He did not hate the buggers in this dream. And even though he knew that they had hidden their queen from him, he did not try to search for her. He always left the giant's body quickly. When he got to the playground, the children were always there, woven and mocking. They wore faces that he knew. Sometimes Peter and sometimes Bonzo, sometimes Stilson and Bernard. Just as often, though, the savage creatures were Eli and Shin, Dink and Petra. Sometimes one of them would be Valentine, and in his dreams he shoved her under the water and waited for her to drown. She writhed in his hands, fought to come up, but at last was still. He dragged her out into the lake, onto the raft, where she lay with her face in the rictus of death. He screamed and wept over her, crying again and again that it was a game. He was only playing. Then Mazarakam shook him awake. "You were calling out in your sleep," he said. "Sorry," Ender said. "Never mind. It's time for another battle." Steadily, the pace increased. There were usually 2 battles a day now, and Ender held practices to a minimum. He would use the time while the others rested to pore over the replays of the last games, trying to spot his own weaknesses, trying to guess what would happen next. Sometimes he was fully prepared for the enemy's innovations. Sometimes he was not. "Oh, I think you're cheating," Ender told Mazur one day. "Oh? You can observe my practice sessions." You can see what I'm working on. You seem to be ready for everything I do. Most of what you see is computer simulations, Mazur said. The computer is programmed to respond to your innovations. Only after you use them once in battle. Then the computer is cheating. You need to get more sleep, Ender. But he could not sleep. He lay awake longer and longer each night, but his sleep was less restful. He woke too often in the night. Whether he was waking up to think more about the game or to escape from his dreams, he wasn't sure. It was as if someone rode with him in his sleep, forcing him to wander through his worst memories, to live in them again as if they were real. Nights were so real that days began to seem dreamlike to him. He began to worry that he would not think clearly, that he would be too tired when he played. Always, when the game began, the intensity of it awoke him. But if his mental abilities began to slip, he wondered, would he notice it? Then he seemed to be slipping. He never had a battle any more in which he did not lose at least a few fighters. Several times the enemy was able to trick him into exposing more weaknesses than he meant to. Other times, the enemy was able to wear him down by attrition until his victory was as much a matter of luck as strategy. Mazur would go over the game with a look of contempt on his face. Look at this, he would say. You didn't have to do this. And Ender would return to practice with his leaders, trying to keep up their morale, but sometimes letting slip his disappointment with their weaknesses, the fact that they made mistakes. Sometimes we make mistakes, Petra whispered to him once. It was a plea for help. And sometimes we don't, Ender answered her. If she got help, it would not be from him. He would teach. Let her find friends among the others. Then came a battle that nearly ended in disaster. Petra led her force too far away. They were too exposed. And she discovered in a moment when Ender wasn't with her. In only a few moments, she had lost all but 2 of her ships. Ender found her then, ordered her to move, and she didn't answer. There was no movement. And in a moment, those 2 fighters would be lost too. Ender knew at once he had pushed her too hard. Because her brilliance, he had called on her to play far more often and under much more demanding circumstances than all but a few of the others. But he had no time now to worry about Petra, or to feel guilty about what he had done to her. He called on Crazy Tom to command the 2 remaining fighters, and then went on, trying to salvage the battle. Petra had occupied a key position, and now all of Ender's strategy came apart. If the enemy had not been too eager and clumsy in exploiting their advantage, Ender would have lost. But Shin was able to catch a group of the enemy in too tight a formation and took them out in a single chain of reaction. Crazy Tom brought his 2 surviving fighters in through the gap and caused havoc with the enemy. And though his ships and Shin's as well were finally destroyed, Fly Molo was able to mop up and complete the victory. At the end of the battle, he could hear Petra crying out, trying to get a microphone. Tell him I'm sorry. I was just so tired. I couldn't think. That was all. Tell Ender I'm sorry. She was not there for the next few practices. And when she did not come back, she was not as quick as she had been, not as daring. Much of what made her good was lost. Ender couldn't use her anymore, except in routine, closely supervised assignments. She was no fool. She knew what had happened. She knew that Ender had no other choice, and told him so. The fact remained that she had broken, and she was far from being the weakest of the squad leaders. It was a warning. He could not press his commanders more than they could bear. Now, instead of using his leaders whenever he needed their skills, he had to keep in mind how often they had fought. He had to spell them off, which meant that sometimes he went into battle with commanders he trusted a little less. As he eased the pressure on them, he increased the pressure on himself. Late one night, he woke up in pain. There was blood on his pillow, the taste of blood in his mouth. His fingers were throbbing. He saw that in his sleep, he had been gnawing on his own fist. The blood was still flowing smoothly. Mazur, he called. Rackham woke up and called at once for a doctor. As the doctor treated the wound, Mazur said, I don't care how much you eat, Ender. Self-cannibalism won't get you out of the school. I was asleep, Ender said. I don't want to get out of command school. Good. The others, the ones who didn't make it. What are you talking about? Before me, your other students, who didn't make it through the training. What happened to them? They didn't make it, that's all. We don't punish the ones who fail. They just don't go on. Like Bonzo? Bonzo? He went home. Not like Bonzo. What then? What happened to them when they failed? Why does it matter, Ender? Ender didn't answer. None of them failed at this point in the course, Ender. You made a mistake with Petra. She'll recover. But Petra is Petra, and you are you. Part of what I am is her. Is what she made me. You won't fail, Ender. Not this early in the course. You've had some tight ones, but you've always won. You don't know what your limits are yet, but if you've reached them already, you're a good deal feebler than I thought. Do they die? Who? The ones who fail. No, they don't die. Good heavens, boy. You're playing games. I think that Bonzo died. I dreamed about him last night. I remembered the way he looked after I jammed his face with my head. I think I must have pushed his nose back into his brain. The blood was coming out of his eyes. I think he was dead right then. It was just a dream. Mazur, I don't want to keep dreaming these things. I'm afraid to sleep. I keep thinking of things that I don't want to remember. My whole life keeps playing out as if I were a recorder and someone else wanted to watch the most terrible parts of my life. We can't drug you if that's what you're hoping for. I'm sorry if you've had bad dreams. Should we leave the light on at night? Don't make fun of me, Ender said. I'm afraid I'm going crazy. The doctor was finished with the bandage. Mazur told him he could go. He went. Are you really afraid of that? Ender thought about it and wasn't sure. In my dreams, Ender said, I'm never sure whether it's really me. Strange dreams are a safety valve, Ender. I'm putting you under a little pressure for the first time in your life, and your body is finding ways to compensate. That's all. You're a big boy now. It's time to stop being afraid of the night. All right, Ender said. He decided then that he would tell Mazur about his dreams again. The days wore on, with battles every day, until at last Ender settled into the routine of the destruction himself. He began to have pains in his stomach. They put him on a bland diet, but soon he didn't have an appetite for anything at all. Eat, Mazur said, and Ender would mechanically put food in his mouth. If nobody told him to eat, he didn't eat. Two more of his squadron leaders collapsed the way that Petra did. The pressure on the rest became all the greater. The enemy outnumbered them by 3 or 4 to 1 in every battle now. The enemy also retreated more readily when things went badly, regrouping to keep the battle going longer and longer. Sometimes battles lasted for hours before they would finally destroy the last enemy ship. Ender began rotating his squadron leaders within the same battle, bringing in fresh and rested ones to take the place of those that were beginning to get sluggish. You know, said Bean one time, as he took over command of Hot Soup's 4 remaining fighters, this game isn't quite as fun as it used to be. Then one day in practice, Ender was drilling his squadron leaders. The room went black, and he woke up on the floor with his face bloody where he had hit the controls. They put him to bed then, and for 3 days he was very ill. He remembered seeing faces in his dreams, but they weren't real faces, and he knew that even though he saw them, he knew he saw Valentine sometimes, and sometimes Peter, sometimes his friends from the battle school, and sometimes the buggers vivisecting him. Once it seemed very real when he saw Colonel Graff bending over him, speaking softly to him. like a kind father. But then he woke up and found his only enemy, Mazar Rackham. I'm awake. So I see, Mazar answered. Took you long enough. You have a battle today. So Ender got up and fought the battle and won it. But there was no second battle that day. They let him go to bed earlier. His hands were shaking as he undressed. During the night, he thought he felt hands touching him gently, hands with affection in them and gentleness. He dreamed he heard voices. You haven't been kind to him. That was not the assignment. How long can he go on? He's breaking down. Long enough. He's nearly finished. So soon? A few days, and then he's through. How will he do when he's already like this? Fine. Even today, he fought better than ever. In his dream, the voices sound like Colonel Graff and Mazar Rackham. But it's the way that dreams were. The craziest things could happen. Because he dreamed he heard one of the voices saying, I can't bear to see what this is doing to him. And the other voice answered, I know. I love him too. And they changed into Valentine in a lie. And in his dream, they were burying him. Only a hill grew up where they had lain his body down. And he dried out and became a home for buggers, like the giant was. All dreams. If there was love or pity for him, it was only in his dreams. He woke up and fought another battle and won. Then he went to bed and slept again, and dreamed again that he woke up and won again, and slept again, and hardly noticed when waking became sleeping, nor did he care. The next day was his last day in command school, though he didn't know it. Mazar Rackham was not in the room with him when he woke up. He showered and dressed and waited for Mazar to come to unlock the door. He didn't come. Mazar tried the door. It was open. Was it an accident that Mazar had let him be free this morning? No one with him to tell him that he must eat, he must go to practice, he must sleep. Freedom! The trouble was, he didn't know what to do. He thought for a moment that he might find his squadron leaders, talk to them face to face, but he didn't know where they were. They could be 20 kilometers away for all he knew. So, after wandering through the tunnels for a little while, he went to the mess hall and ate breakfast near a few Marines who were telling dirty jokes that Ender could not begin to understand. Then he went to the simulator room for practice. Even though he was free, he could not think of anything else to do. Mazar was waiting for him. Ender walked slowly into the room. His step was slightly shuffling, as he felt tired and dull. Mazar frowned. Are you awake, Ender? The other people in the simulation room. There were other people in the simulator room. Ender wondered why they were there, but didn't bother to ask. It wasn't worth asking. No one could tell him anyway. He walked to the simulator controls and sat down, ready to start. Ender Wiggin, said Mazar. Please turn around. Today's game needs a little explanation. Ender turned around. He glanced at the men gathered at the back of the room. Most of them he had never seen before. Some were even dressed in civilian clothes. He saw Anderson and wondered what he was doing here. Who was taking care of the battle school if he was gone? He saw Graff and remembered the lake and the woods outside Greensboro and wanted to go home. Take me home, he said silently to Graff. In my dreams, you said you still love me. Take me home. But Graff only nodded to him, a greeting, not a promise. And Ender acted as though he didn't know him at all. Pay attention, please, Ender. Today is your final examination in command school. These observers are here to evaluate what you have learned. If you prefer not to have them in the room, we'll have them watch on another simulator. They can stay. Final examination. After today, perhaps you could rest. For this to be a fair test of your ability, not just to do what you have practiced many times, but also to meet challenges you have never seen before, today's battle introduces a new element. It is staged around a planet. This will affect the enemy's strategy and will force you to improvise. Please concentrate on the game today. Ender beckoned Mazar closely and asked him quietly, Am I the first student to make it this far? If you win today, Ender, You will be the first student to do so. More than that, I'm not at liberty to say. Well, I'm at liberty to hear it. You can be as petulant as you want tomorrow. Today, though, I'd appreciate if you'd keep your mind up on the examination. Let's not waste all you've already done. Now, will you go deal with the planet? I have to get someone behind it, or it's a blind spot. True. And the gravity is going to affect fuel levels. Cheaper to go down than up. Yes. Does the little doctor work against the planet? Mazer's face went rigid. Ender, the buggers never deliberately attacked a civilian population in either invasion. You decide whether it would be wise to adopt a strategy that would invite reprisals. Is the planet the only new thing? Can you remember the last time I've given you a battle with only one new thing? Let me assure you, Ender, that I will not be kind to you today. I have a responsibility to the fleet, not to let a second-rate student graduate. I will do my best against you, Ender, and I have no desire to coddle you. Just keep in mind everything you know about yourself, and everything you know about the buggers, and you have a fair chance of amounting to something. Mazer left the room. Ender spoke into the microphone. Are you there? All of us, said Bean. Kinda late for practice this morning, aren't you? So they hadn't told the squadron leaders. Ender toyed with the idea of telling them how important this battle was to him, but decided it would not help them to have an extraneous concern on their minds. Sorry, he said, I overslept. They laughed. They didn't believe him. He led them through the maneuvers, warming up for the battle ahead. It took him longer than usual to clear his mind, to concentrate on command. But soon enough, he was up to speed, responding quickly, thinking well, or at least, he told himself, I think I'm thinking well. The simulator field cleared. Ender waited for the game to appear. What will happen if I pass the test today? Is there another school? Another year or two of grueling training? Another year of isolation? Another year of people pushing me this way and that way? Another year without any control over my own life? He tried to remember how old he was. 11. How many years ago did he turn 11? How many days? It must have happened here at command school, but he couldn't remember the day. Maybe he didn't even notice it at the time. Nobody noticed it, except perhaps Valentine. And he waited for the game to appear. He wished he could simply lose it, lose the battle badly, and completely, so they would remove him from training like Bonzo, and let him go home. But Bonzo had been assigned to Cartagena. He wanted to travel. He wanted to see travel orders that said Greensboro. Success meant it would go on. Failure meant he could go home. No, this isn't true, he told himself. They need me, and if I fail, there may not be any home to return to. But he did not believe it. In his conscious mind, he knew it was true. But in other places, deeper places, he doubted that they needed him. Mazer's urgency was just another trick, just another way to make me do what they want me to do, another way to keep me from resting, from doing nothing for a long, long time. Then the enemy formation disappeared, and Ender's weariness turned to despair. The enemy outnumbered him 1,000 to 1. The simulator glowed green with them, and they were grouped in a dozen different formations, shifting positions, changing shapes, moving in seemingly random patterns through the simulator field. He could not find a path through them. A space that seemed open would close suddenly, and another appear, and a formation that seemed penetrable would suddenly change and be forbidding. The planet was at the far edge of the field, and for all Ender knew, there were just as many enemy ships beyond it, out of the simulator's range. As for his own fleet, it consisted of 20 starships, each with only 4 fighters. He knew the 4 fighters' starships. They were old-fashioned, sluggish, and the range of their little doctors was half of that of the newer ones. 80 fighters against at least 5,000, perhaps 10,000 enemy ships. He heard his squadron leaders breathing heavily. He could also hear, from the observers behind him, a quiet curse. It was nice to know that one of the adults noticed it wasn't a fair test. Not that it made any difference. Fairness wasn't part of the game. That was plain. There was no attempt to give him even a remote chance at success. After all they've been through, and never meant to let me pass at all. He saw in his mind Bonzo and his vicious little knot of friends, confronting him, threatening him. He had been able to shame Bonzo into fighting him alone. That would hardly work here. He could not surprise the enemy with his ability, as he had done with the older boys in the battle room. Mazur knew Ender's abilities inside and out. The observers behind him began to cough, move nervously. They were beginning to realize that Ender didn't know what to do. I don't care anymore, thought Ender. You can keep your game. If you won't even give me a chance, why should I play? Like his last game in Battle School, when they put two armies against him. And just as you remembered that game, apparently Bean remembered it too, for his voice came over the headset saying, "Remember, the enemy's gate is down." Molo, Soup, Vlad, Dumper, and Crazy Tom all laughed. They remembered too. And Ender also laughed. It was funny. The adults taking this all so seriously, and the children playing along, believing it too, until suddenly the adults went too far, tried too hard, and the children could see through their game. Forget it, Mazur. I don't care if I pass your test. I don't care if I follow your rules. If you can cheat, so can I. I won't let you beat me unfairly. I'll beat you unfairly first. In that final battle in Battle School, he won by ignoring the enemy, by ignoring his own losses. He moved against the enemy's gate, and the enemy's gate was down. If I break this rule, they'll never let me be a commander. It'll be too dangerous. I'll never have to play a game again. And that is victory. He whispered quickly into the microphone. His commanders took their parts of the fleet and grouped themselves into a thick projectile, a cylinder aimed at the nearest of the enemy formations. The enemy, far from trying to repel him, welcomed him in, so he could be thoroughly entrapped before they destroyed him. Mazur is at least taking into account the fact that by now they would have learned to respect me, thought Ender, and that does buy me some time. Ender dodged downward, north, east, and down again, not seeming to follow any path, but always ending up a little closer to the enemy planet. Finally, the enemy was able to close in on him too tightly. Then suddenly, Ender's formation burst. His fleet seemed to melt into chaos. The enemy fighters seemed to follow no plan at all, firing at enemy ships at random, working their way into hopeless individual paths among the buggercraft. After a few moments of battle, however, Ender whispered to his squadron leaders once more, and suddenly a dozen of the remaining fighters formed their way into a formation. But now they were on the far side of the enemy's most formidable groups. They had, with terrible losses, passed through, and now they had covered more than half the distance to the enemy's planet. The enemy sees now, thought Ender. Surely Mazur sees what I'm doing. Or perhaps Mazur cannot believe what I would do. Well, so much the better for me. Ender's tiny fleet darted this way and back, sending 2 or 3 ships out as if to attack, then bringing them back. The enemy closed in, drawing in ships and formations that had been widely scattered, bringing them in for the kill. The enemy was most concentrated beyond Ender, so he could not escape back into the open space, closing him in. Excellent, thought Ender. Closer, come closer. He whispered a command, and the ships dropped like rocks towards the planet's surface. They were starships and fighters, completely unequipped to handle the heat of passage beyond an atmosphere. But Ender never intended them to reach the atmosphere. Almost from the moment they began to drop, they were pushing their little doctors on one thing, the planet itself. 1, 2, 4, 7 of his fighters were blown away. It was all a gamble now, whether any of his ships would survive long enough to get in range. But it did not take long. Once they could focus on the planet's surface. Just a moment with the doctor device. That's all I want. It occurred to Ender that perhaps the computer wasn't even equipped to show what would happen to a planet if the little doctor attacked it. What will I do then? Shout, "Bang, you're dead"? Ender took his hands off the controls and leaned in to watch what would happen. The perspective was close to the enemy planet now, as the ship hurtled into its gravity well. Surely it's in range now, thought Ender. It must be in range, and the computer can't handle it. Then the surface of the planet, which filled half the simulator, began to bubble, and there was a gout of explosions, hurling debris out towards Ender's fighters. Ender tried to imagine what was happening inside the planet. The field was growing and growing, the molecules bursting apart, but finding nowhere for the separate atoms to go. Within 3 seconds, the entire planet burst apart, becoming a sphere of bright dust, hurtling outward. Ender's fighters were among the first to go. Their perspective suddenly vanished, and now the simulator could only display the perspective of the starships waiting beyond the edges of the battle. It was as close as Ender wanted to be. The sphere of the exploding planet grew outward faster than the enemy ships could avoid it, and it carried with it the little doctor. Not so little anymore, the field taking apart every ship in its path, erupting each one in a dot of light before it went out. Only the very periphery of the simulation did the MD field weaken. 2 or 3 enemy ships were drifting away. Ender's own warships did not explode, but where the vast enemy fleet had been, the planet they had protected, there was nothing meaningful. A lump of dirt was growing as gravity drew much of the debris downward again. It was glowing hot and spinning visibly. It was also much smaller than the world had been before. Much of its mass was now a cloud, still floating outward. Ender took off his headphones, filled with the cheers of his squadron leaders, and only then realized that there was just as much noise in the room with him. Men in uniform were hugging each other, laughing, shouting. Others were weeping. Some knelt or lay prostrate. Ender didn't understand. It all seemed wrong. They were supposed to be angry. Colonel Graff detached himself from the others and came to Ender. Tears streamed down his face. He was smiling. He bent over, reached out his arms, and to Ender's surprise, he embraced him tightly and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you, Ender. Thank God for you, Ender." The others came soon, shaking his hand, congratulating him. He tried to make sense of this. Had he passed the test after all? It was his victory, not theirs? On a hollow one at that? A cheat? Why did they act as if he had won with honor? The crowd parted and Mazur Rakim walked through. He came straight to Ender and held out his hand. "You made the hard choice, boy. All or nothing. End them or us. But heaven knows there was no other way you could have done it. Congratulations. You beat them and it's all over." All over. Beat them. Ender didn't understand. "I beat you." Mazur laughed. A loud laugh that filled the room. "Ender, you never played me. You never played a game since I became your enemy." Ender didn't get the joke. He had played a great many games, at terrible cost to himself. He began to get angry. Mazur reached out and touched his shoulder. Ender shrugged it off. Mazur then grew serious and said, "Ender, for the past few months, you have been the battle commander of our fleets. This was the third invasion. There were no games. The battles were real. And the only enemy you fought were buggers. You won every battle. And today you finally fought them at their home world, where their queen was. All the queens from all their colonies. They were all there, and you destroyed them completely. They'll never attack us again. You did it. You. Real. Not a game." Ender's mind was too tired to cope with it. They weren't just points of light in the air. They were real ships that had fought with, and he had fought with real ships. A real world that he had blasted into oblivion. He walked through the crowd, dodging their congratulations, ignoring their hands, their words, their rejoicing. When he got to his own room, he stripped off his clothes, climbed into bed, and slept. Ender awoke, and they shook him. It took a moment to recognize them. It was Graf and Rackham. He turned his back on them. Let me sleep. Ender, we need to talk to you, said Graf. Ender rolled to face them. They've been playing out the videos on Earth all day, night. All day, all night, since the battle yesterday. Yesterday? Had he slept through the next day? You're a hero, Ender. They've seen what you did. You and all the others. I don't think there's a government on Earth that hasn't voted you to their highest medal. I killed them all, didn't I? Who? Asked Graf. The buggers? That was the idea. Mazur leaned in close. That's what the war was for. All their queens. So I killed all their children, all of everything. They decided that when they attacked us, it wasn't your fault. It's what had to happen. Ender grabbed Mazur's uniform and hung to it, pulling him down so they're face to face. I didn't want to kill them all. I don't want to kill anybody. I'm not a killer. You didn't want me, you bastard. You wanted Peter. But you made me do it. You tricked me into it. He was crying. He was out of control. Of course, we tricked you into it. That's the whole point, said Graf. It had to be a trick, or you couldn't have done it. It's the bind we were in. We had to have a commander with so much empathy he would think like the buggers, understand them, and anticipate them. But much compassion, so much compassion, that he would win the love of his underlings and work with them like a perfect machine, as perfect as the buggers. But somebody with that much compassion could never be the killer we needed, could never go into battle willing to win at all costs. If you win, you couldn't do it. Oh, if you knew, you couldn't do it. If you were the kind of person who would do it, even if you knew, you could never have understood the buggers well enough. And it had to be a child, Ender, said Mazur. You were faster than me, better than me. I was too old and cautious. Any decent person knows what warfare is. Any decent person who knows what warfare is can never go to battle with a whole heart. But you didn't know. We made sure you didn't know. You were reckless and brilliant and young. It's what you were born for. We had pilots on our ships, didn't we? Yes. I was ordering pilots to go in and die. I didn't even know it. They know it, Ender. And they went anyway. They knew what it was for. You never asked me. You never told me the truth about anything. You had to be a weapon, Ender, like a gun, like the little doctor, functioning perfectly, but not knowing what you are aimed at. We aimed you. We're responsible. If there was something wrong, we did it. Tell me later, Ender said, his eyes closed. Mazur shook him. Don't go to sleep, Ender. It's very important. You're finished with me. Now leave me alone. That's why we're here, Mazur said. We're trying to tell you. They're not through with you, not at all. It's crazy down there. They're going to start a war. Americans claiming the Warsaw Pact is about to attack, and the Russians are saying the same thing about the hegemon. The bugger war isn't 24 hours dead, and the world down there is back at fighting again, as bad as ever. And all of them are worried about you. All of them want you. The greatest military leader in history. They want you to lead their armies, the Americans, the hegemon, everybody but the Warsaw Pact. And they want you dead. Fine with me, said Ender. We have to take you away from here. There are Russian Marines all over Eros, and the pole mark is Russian. It would turn to bloodshed at any time. Ender turned his back. This time they let him. He did not sleep, though. He listened to them. I was afraid of this, Rackham. You pushed him too hard. Some of those lesser outposts could have waited until after. You couldn't have given him some days to rest? Are you doing it too, Graf? Trying to decide how I could have done it better? You don't know what would have happened if I hadn't pushed. Nobody knows. If I did it the way I did it the way I did, and it worked. Above all, it worked. Memorize that defense, Graf. You may have to use it too. Sorry. I can see what it's done to him. Colonel Licky says There'll be a chance that he'll be permanently damaged, but I don't believe it. He's too strong. Winning meant a lot to him. And he won. Don't tell me about strong. The kid's 11. Give him some rest, Rackham. Things haven't exploded yet. We can post a guard outside his door. Or post a guard outside another door and pretend that it's his. Whatever. They went away. Ender slept again. Time passed without touching Ender, except glancing blows. Once he awoke for a few minutes with something pressing his hand, pushing downward on it, with a dull, insistent pain. He reached over and touched it. It was a needle passing into his vein. He tried to pull it out, but it was taped on and he was too weak. Another time he awoke in darkness to hear people near him murmuring and cursing. His ears were ringing with loud noise, and he awakened. Someone said, "Get the lights on." And another time he thought somebody said, crying softly near him. It might have been a single day. It might have been a week. From his dreams, it could have been months. He seemed to pass through lifetimes in his dreams, through the giant's drink again, past the wolf children, reliving the terrible deaths, the constant murders. He heard a voice whispering in the forest. You had to kill the children to get to the end of the world. And he tried to answer. I never wanted to kill anybody. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to kill anybody. But the forest laughed at him. And when he leapt from the cliff at the end of the world, sometimes it was not clouds that caught him, but a fighter that carried him to a vantage point near the surface of the bugger's world. So he could watch over and over again the eruption of death when Dr. Device set off a reaction on the planet's face, and then closer and closer until he could watch individual buggers explode, turn to light, then collapse in a pile of dirt before his eyes. And the queen, surrounded by infants, the only queen, was Mother, and the infants were Valentine and all the children he had known in the battle school. One of them had Bonzo's face, and he lay there bleeding through his eyes and nose, saying, You have no honor. And always the dream ended with a mirror, or a pool of water, or the metal surface of a ship, something that would reflect his face back to him. At first it was always Peter's face, with blood and a snake's tail coming from the mouth. After a while, though, it began to be his own face, and sad with eyes that grieved for a billion murders. But they were his own eyes, and he was content to wear them. That was where the world ender lived, for many centuries during the 5 days of the League War. When he woke again, he was lying in the darkness. In the distance, he could hear the thump of explosions. He listened for a while. Then he heard a footstep. He turned over and flung out a hand to grasp whoever was sneaking up on him. Surely enough, he caught someone's clothing and pulled him down to his knees, ready to kill him if need be. Ender, it's me. He knew the voice. It came out of memory as if it were a million years ago. A lie? Salam, pinprick. What are you trying to do, kill me? Yes, I thought you were trying to kill me. I was trying not to wake you up. Well, at least you have some survival instinct left. The way Mazur talks about it, you were becoming a vegetable. I was trying to. What's the thumping? There's a war going on here. Our section is blacked out to keep us safe. Ender swung his legs to sit up. He couldn't do it, though. His head hurt too bad. He winced in pain. Don't sit up, Ender. It's all right. It looks like we might not win it. Not all the Warsat people went through the Paul Mark. Some of them came over when the Strategos told them you were loyal to the IF. I was asleep, so he lied. You weren't plotting treason in your dreams, were you? Some of the Russians told us that the Paul Mark ordered them to find you and kill you, and almost killed them. Whatever they may feel about other people, Ender, they love you. The whole world watched our battles, videos day and night. I've seen some, complete with your voice giving orders. It's all there, nothing censored. Good stuff. You've got a career in the vids. I don't think so, said Ender. I was joking. Can you believe it? We won the war. We were so eager to grow up so we could fight in it. And it was us the whole time. I mean, we're kids, Ender. And it was us. Eli laughed. It was you anyway. You were good. I didn't know how to get us out of the last one, but you did. You were good. The thumping went silent. Listen to that, said Eli. They listened. The door opened. Someone stood there, someone small. It's over, he said. It was Bean. As if to prove it, the lights went on. Ho, Bean, Ender said. Ho, Ender. Petra followed him in, with Dink holding her hand. They came to Ender's bed. Hey, the hero's awake, said Dink. Who won, said Ender. We did, Ender, said Bean. You were there. He's not that crazy, Bean. He meant who won just now. Petra took Ender's hand. There was a truce on Earth. They'd been negotiating for 3 days. They finally agreed to accept the Locke proposal. He doesn't know about the Locke proposal. It's very complicated. But what it means is that the IF will stay in existence, but without the Warsaw Pact in it. So the Warsaw Pact Marines are going home. I think Russia agreed to do it because they were facing a revolt of the Islamic states. Somebody's got troubles. About 500 died here, but it was worse on Earth. The head's been resigned, said Dink. It's crazy down there. Who knows? You okay? Petra asked him, touching his head. You scared us. They said you were crazy. They said they were crazy, and we said they were crazy. I'm crazy, said Ender, but I think I'm okay. When did you decide that? Asked the lie. When I thought you were about to kill me, and I decided to kill you first. I guess I'm just a killer to the core, but I'd rather be alive than dead. They laughed and agreed with him. Ender began to cry and embraced Bean and Petra, who were closest. I missed you, he said. I wanted to see you so bad. You saw us pretty bad, Petra answered. She kissed his cheek. I saw you magnificent, said Ender. The ones I needed most. I used up soonest. Bad planning on my part. Everything's okay now, said Dink. Nothing was wrong with any of us that 5 days of cowering in blacked out rooms in the middle of a war couldn't cure. I don't have to be your commander anymore, do I? Asked Ender. I don't want to command anybody again. You don't have to command anybody, said Dink. But you're always our commander. And they were silent for a while. So what do we do now? Asked the lie. The bugger war's over, and so is the war down there on Earth, and even the war here. What do we do now? We're kids, said Petra. They'll probably make us go to school. It's a law. You have to go to school until you're 17. They all laughed at that. Laughed until tears streamed down their faces. The lake was still. There was no breeze. The two men sat together in chairs on the floating dock. A small wooden raft was tied up to the dock. Graf hooked his foot on the rope and pulled the raft in and let it drift out, then pulled it in again. You've lost weight. One kind of stress puts it on, another takes it off. I am a creature of chemicals. It must have been hard. Graf shrugged. Not really. I knew I'd be acquitted. Some of us weren't so sure. People were crazy for a while there. Mistreatment of children, negligent homicide. Those videos of Bonzo and Stilson's deaths were pretty gruesome. To watch one child do that to another. As much as anything, I think the video saved me. The prosecution edited them, but we showed the whole thing. It was plain that Ender was not the provocateur. After that, it was just a second guessing game. I said I did what I believed was necessary for the preservation of the human race, and it worked. We got the judges to agree that the prosecution had to prove beyond doubt that Ender would have won the war without the training we gave him. After that, it was simple. Anyway, Graf, it was a great relief to us. I know we quarreled, and I know the prosecution used tapes of our conversations against you, but I knew that you were right, and I offered to testify for you. I know, Anderson. My lawyers told me. So what will you do now? I don't know. I'm still relaxing. I have a few years of leave accrued, enough to take me to retirement, and I have plenty of salary that I never use sitting around in banks. I could live on the interest. Maybe I'll do nothing. That sounds nice, but I couldn't stand it. I've been offered the presidency of three different universities on the theory that I'm an educator. But they don't believe me when I say that all I ever cared about at the battle school was the game. They think I'll go with the other offer. Commissioner? Now that the wars are over, it's time to play games again. It'll almost be like a vacation anyway. Only 28 teams in the league. Though after years of watching those children flying, football is like watching slugs bash into each other. They laughed. Graf sighed and pushed the raft with his foot. That raft, surely you can't float on it. Graf shook his head. Ender built it. That's right. This is where you took him. It's even been needed. It's even been deeded over to him. I saw to it that he was amply rewarded. He'll have all the money he ever needs. If they ever let him come back to use it. They never will. With Dee agitating for him to come home, Dee isn't on the nets anymore. Anderson raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Dee is retired. Permanently. You know something, you old fart eater? You know who Dee is. Was. Well, tell me. No. You're no fun anymore, Graf. I never was. At least you can tell me why. There was a lot of us who thought Dee would be hegemon one day. There was never a chance of that. No, even Dee's mob of political cretins couldn't persuade the hegemon to bring Ender back to Earth. Ender is far too dangerous. He's only 11, 12 now. All the more dangerous because he could easily be controlled. In all the world, the name of Ender is the one to conjure with. The child god, the miracle worker, with life and death in his hands. Every petty tyrant to be would have to would like to have the boy and set him in front of an army and watch the world either flock or join or cower in fear. If Ender came to Earth, he'd want to come here to rest, to salvage what he can be, what he can have of his childhood. But they'd never let him rest. I see. Someone explain that to Dee? Graf smiled. Dee explained it to someone else, someone who could have used Ender, as no one else could have, to rule the world and make the world like it. Who? Locke. Locke is the one who argued for Ender to stay on Eros. All is not as it seems. It's too deep for me, Graf. Give me the game. Nice, neat rules, referees, beginnings and endings, winners and losers. And then everybody gets to go home to their families. Give me tickets to some games now and then, all right? You won't really stay here and retire, will you? No. You're going to the hegemony, aren't you? I'm the new Minister of Colonization. So they're doing it? As soon as we get the reports back on the bugger colony worlds, I mean, they are there, already fertile, with housing and industry in place, and all the buggers dead. Very convenient. We'll repeal the population limitation laws, which everybody hates, and all those thirds and fourths and fifths will get on starships and head out for worlds known and unknown. Will people really go? People always go. Always. They can always believe they can make a better life than in the old world. What the hell? Maybe they can. Ender's game done. Finished.